That is definitely an interesting and politically incorrect tactic. But I can see it working. This is like the look.
When I talk to you, do you feel like I'm lecturing? Like, do you feel like you're hearing from your mother? No.
It's actually just the look that you give me, that stare. Like I feel the power of that, and I'm terrified, Shelley.
David, when you were talking about your Python analogy about how we maybe have our fingertips on the Python.
We're issuing strongly worded statements to the Python.
No, I think we're like maybe petting the Python. Like what happened this last week at APEC with like Xi Jinping had that dinner with all these business CEOs, right? And like the idea that like they would gather and like give him a standing ovation.
Oh, you mean the kowtow dinner?
Yeah. So are we gonna choke the Python? Or are we gonna?
Well, I was trying to be as charitable as I could, Shelley, and so you're probably more accurate. I mean, if you remember, I think many years ago there was an article, and I believe it may have been written by Matt Pottinger, that had the title had something to do with the Python in the chandelier, and where we are today. The Python ain't in the chandelier anymore. It's wrapped around one of our legs as a country. And in terms of economic warfare, it's interesting that I guess it was 2015, the PLA published a book, and it talked about the importance of economic warfare is the most important, because you can stymie the plans and the ability of a country to respond, and it's the crippling power. And so, in the tropical, the challenge with economic warfare coming against the United States or the Philippines is, unless you are trained and unless you're aware of it, you can't see it. It's one thing to talk about landing craft coming up on the beach. You can see that happening. Okay, we can see that kind of warfare, or a building is blowing up. But when someone takes over, a country takes over your power grid for Metro Manila, for instance, and it turns out that the majority voting power, contrary to Philippine law, has been turned over by way of a proxy to the State Grid Corporation of China. And any repairs to the system Chinese engineers have to be flown in. And the control of the grid is run from Beijing. I mean, that's the kind of Python pulsing, wrapping around the leg that is really frightening. And your point, I think, Shelley, is that we're not at that awareness stage in our country of the danger, whereas President Marcos understands the problem with this power grid. And if I could tie it back to your comment about APEC, one of the things that occurred yesterday was that there was a signing of what's called a 1-2-3 agreement between the United States and the Philippines. And this was done at the sidelines of APEC. Now, this 1-2-3 agreement has to do with non-proliferation of nuclear devices and permitting civilian use. Now, that's what the official statement and agreement is. But if you really look behind the backstory there of that agreement signed yesterday, was to permit the United States and the Philippines to jointly work together to provide, they're called miniature nuclear power plants. And this becomes really important for the Philippines, for not only for climate change, clean energy. Okay, I get that. But it's important to begin to unwrap this python around the leg, if you will, and get an independent Philippine-controlled power system for Metro Manila, and to try to get away from the Chinese-controlled power system that they're under now. Because if you think about it, in terms of any time of conflict, if you have the switch to turn the electric power off in a country, boy, have you got an advantage. And so that was something that occurred just yesterday in San Francisco.
Yeah, in the U.S., I remember not too long ago that there was images captured of that giant Chinese spy balloon, right? And that was, for most Americans, that was the most like visual, obvious sign of, the Chinese Communist Party doing something to America. But at the same time, like, if you look at, like, say, the Chinese control of the port of Long Beach, one of the most important shipping ports in the U.S., like they're controlling the software that controls the loading cranes and that kind of, like, you can stop almost all shipping in the major U.S. ports by essentially shutting off that system, right? Uh, so there's all manner of things in this country as well that I think just 99% of people have no awareness of. How do we change that?
Well, Matt, here's the thing. I think our foundation has done the very first trainings ever done in the world on political warfare. In reflecting on this type of education, one of the things that I've come to really understand is that there are really two problems here. The first is you've got to develop an awareness. That's the baby speed bump. And that's where you and Shelley and Chris are playing a really important role in developing awareness of this problem. And having developed, so that's going to take time. And you can see it beginning to happen. Let me give you one example. While Xi Jinping held his kowtow supplicant dinner in San Francisco, and there were a whole group of CEOs that were there, that's not representative of the business community of our country. Those are the CEOs that have a problem. And their problem is they have one foot bear trapped into the People's Republic of China with their current business operations. And they're trying to figure out some way to goose it up or get things back to the way it was so we can start, making money again. And they're not aware, really understanding the risks of what they're doing. But what I've seen over the last several years is this big bleed out of American and foreign business out of China. And these companies, I mean, COVID certainly helped with that. These companies, when they make a decision to start to move their supply chains, Xi Jinping may think he can flip a light switch and cause the Chinese companies to all snap to attention and change whatever they're doing. But that doesn't work in our society. You know, Biden can flip whatever switches that he wants and make whatever policy decisions that they want to in the Commerce Department and so forth. And okay, maybe they can ease off on export controls, or maybe they can change something on the sanctions. But when a company makes a decision, they're going to pull out of China and they're going to set up their pieces of their supply chain in Mexico or in Vietnam or wherever. That is a generation, if not multi-generational decision. They're not going to go back all that fast. And so this exercise that took place in San Francisco, basically what it does, I think, Shelley, is it shows us those companies and those CEOs that, to use your term, are not digging their fingernails into the neck of the python. They're petting the python, and they've self-identified. But I don't really think that that's going to be where American business is going to go. I think, people are starting to see, they can start to smell the rose now. And the work that you folks have done has been really instrumental in that, in teaching, because effectively what you're doing is you've been teaching and building this awareness. And in due course, we'll get to the point where there's sufficient awareness that now comes the second speed bump, and that is, so what? What are you going to do about it? And that's where the rubber meets the road. And hopefully we will be able to learn some techniques and uh, tricks, if you will, from some of our allies like the Philippines who are already in the fight. And we'll have to create some of our own, and we'll have to stand up. And to use Dave Stilwell's comments, which I agree with. We're going to have to actually stand up and say, hey, part of our policy is we're going to contain China. And we're going to do it for national security reasons and because China doesn't follow the rules of the road. And that may involve some reciprocity and some other challenges that we have to do. But our country is going to have to really start to push back. And right now, we're at the very, very beginning stages of having some statements. We haven't really done anything yet. So we have a long ways to go.
We do have a long ways to go, but I do appreciate you saying that it's, you know, me and Chris and Shelley that are really leading the way.
Mostly you, Matt.